The cloud. Here we go. So the portion of Bamidbar, the name of the Parsha Bamidbar means in the desert, and it is found in Numbers 1:1. Again, we're starting the fourth book. So Numbers 1:1. In the Sinai desert, God says to conduct a census of the 12 tribes of Israel. Moses counts 603,550 men of draftable age, ages 20 to 60 years. The tribe of Levi, numbering 22,300 males, age 1 month and older, is counted separately. The Levites are to serve in the sanctuary. They replace the firstborn, whose number they approximated, since they were disqualified when they participated in the worshiping of the golden calf. In other words, in the beginning, the plan was that the firstborn in every family should perform the service in the temple. In other words, there's no designated tribe to serve in the temple, but every family has a sort of a representative. But because the tribe of Levi because the firstborn amongst the other Jewish people have sinned with the golden calf, and the only people who did not sin were the tribe of Levi, so now the tribe of Levi get that honor or right or responsibility, and in turn they don't get a portion of the land of Israel, but that's another story. When the people broke camp, the 3 Levite clans dismantled and transported the sanctuary and reassembled it at the center of the next encampments. Then they erected their own tents around it. The Kahatites, it's one family, in other words, the family of Levi had 3 sons, Gershon, Kahat, Merari. We start with Kahat. They carried the sanctuary's vessels, the ark, the menorah, etc., in their specially designed coverings on their shoulders. Camped to the south, the Gershonites, in charge of the tapestries and roof coverings, to its west, and the families of Merari, who transported its wall panels and pillars, to its north. Before the sanctuary entranceway, to the east, were the tents of Moses, Aaron, and Aaron's sons. So you have, when they would camp, you had the temple in the center, surrounded by 3 sides with the 3 families of the Levites, and in the front was Moses and Aaron's sons. Outside that sort of circle, beyond the Levite circle, the 12 tribes encamped in 4 groups of 3 tribes each. To the east were Judah, population 74,000, Yissachar and Zebulun. So in other words, there were 4 camps of 3 tribes each. So in the east was Judah, Yissachar, Zebulun. To the south was Reuben, Shimon, and Gad. To the west was Ephraim, Manasseh, and Benjamin. To the north, Dan, Asher, and Naphtali. The formation was kept also while traveling. There's a few opinions about that, but okay. There's 2 opinions about that. Each tribe had its own Nasi, prince or leader, and its own flag with its tribal color and emblem. And that's the setup that we have in this week's Parsha. Again, you have the temple when they camped and also when they traveled, at least according to one opinion. You have the temple in the center of the camp, surrounded by Levites and priests on all 4 sides. And beyond the Levites and priests, you had the four camps of the Jewish people, 3 tribes per camp. And you end up with a Parsha that has a lot of numbers and a lot of technical details. Well, maybe that's why they call the book of Numbers, even though today in Hebrew we call it the book of Bamidbar, the wilderness. But in English it's called Numbers, and it's also in the Medrash it's referred to as Chumash HaPekudim, the book of Numbers, or the book of the census, because there is a census in the beginning of the book, this week's Parsha, and there's also a census in the end of the book. 40 years later, there's a census at the end of the book. So there's a lot of numbers, and this week's Parsha sounds very technical and a lot of numbers. But of course, if we look beneath the numbers and beneath the technicality, there are many lessons and that can be derived and should be derived. And that's what we're going to try to do. Try to do today. So that's the roadmap for the next few minutes. Okay. So the first thing you want to think about is you have to be a little bit honest about the nature of this book, of the 4th book of the Torah. And the fourth book of the Torah, in a way, is a little bit depressing. So I'm going to try to spend the next 2-3 minutes to show how depressing the book is, maybe less, 60 seconds, to show how depressing this book is. And then we're going to try to look at a deeper perspective and say that to see the bright side. But if you want to look at this book, it starts out in a very optimistic way, because it starts out with the image, even just this Parsha. They're camped around the temple. There's a tabernacle in the center. The Mishkan is in the center. All the people are around it. There are numbers, there's order. And there's order around the temple, and order represents meaning. So there's meaning. And we're ready to travel through the desert, right? The desert is a place of chaos. There's no civilization. There are no roads. There's no order. It's just wilderness, right? Bamidbar is in the wilderness. But somehow what we're doing here is the Torah is providing a sense of order in the wilderness. Okay. What happens? So this week's and next week's Parsha is all relatively orderly. The following Parsha, the Jewish people start traveling. And once they start traveling, all the order that you see in the beginning of the book unravels very quickly. And first they start complaining, multiple complaints, then they send the spies. After the spies, they're told that they're going to stay in the desert for 40 years. And then you have the rebellion with Korach against Moses. And it's story after story after story of complaint, rebellion, and disappointment. And the great hope in the beginning of the book that we're just days away, or maybe weeks away, but maybe even days away from the entry to the land of Israel, that hope unravels very quickly in this book. And then if you talk about what we mentioned earlier, that at the end of the book, there's another census. In a way, that's very sad, because the second census, the Torah points out, is that in the second census, which is almost the same amount of people, nobody was counted in the first census isn't counted in the second census, because all the people who counted in the first census passed on over the 40 years. And then the end of the book transitions to the new census, which is the new generation. So in a way, this book is not very uplifting. If you think about the specific complaints, what do the Jewish people want? They want to go back to Egypt, right? It's almost unraveling and undoing the whole purpose of the second book of the Torah, the book of Exodus. So on one hand, you could think about this as very, very, very disappointing. Okay, so that's the negative view. So we could, if you want the negative view, we could close now and have a nice day. No, you don't want the negative view. You want the deeper view. Deeper view says like this: yes, wilderness, Midbar, is a place of chaos, and in a way, this entire world is the wilderness. There's civilization, but it's spiritual wilderness, and in a way, the whole purpose of the Torah is actually to bring the Torah to the chaos of the wilderness. So in some ways, the most important arena where the Torah plays out is in the third book. That's the goal. It's not a mistake, it's the goal. Now, it so happens to be that in the real world, both on a personal level, but on a national level as well, there are disappointments, there are setbacks, and it's never as orderly as you imagine, right? Life is not as we plan it. Everybody makes their plans for life. And when you're very young, you have your whole life figured out. But then in the reality, different things change. And there's challenges that come up, and there are failures, but those failures open up different opportunities, and they open up different, certainly opportunities for growth and for understanding and for spiritual maturity. And that's the real world. The real world is much more messy than we would imagine. And in some way, especially if you look at the Hasidic interpretation, the traveling through the desert is, in fact, in a way, the ultimate goal of the Torah. And yes, there are challenges, and yes, there are difficulties, and yes, there are setbacks, but that's where everything has to take place, because the goal is specifically, if you think about it, to bring order to the chaos. So I'm just going to say two sub-points within this greater point is, if you want to look at the order of the Torah. So let's take out the fifth book, because the fifth book is the repetition. So we'll put that aside. So let's say the body of the Torah is the four. I'm not going to make a division. I'm just saying for the purpose of this discussion, the fifth is repetition. But the theme of the Torah is the first four books. First book is the story of the family, patriarchs and matriarchs and their children. So it's family. In the second book, we talk about we become a nation. We leave Egypt, we get the Torah at Sinai, and now we're a nation. That's the second. So we go from family to nation. First book, family, second book, nation. Then you have the third book and the fourth book. And it's very interesting. What happens in the third book and the fourth book? So the third book opens, Hashem speaks to Moshe, Be'ohel Moed, in the tent of meeting, in the temple, in the Mishkan that they built. The entire third book takes place within the temple. That's where Moshe is, God is speaking to Moshe. The one episode, there are really two episodes in the book, two very short episodes, but even the drama that you have, which is in the beginning of the third book, which is the death of the sons of Aaron on the eighth day, there's some sort of the moving forward of the narrative of the story. That's also in the temple. It happens in the temple. So in other words, you have book one is family, book two is nation, book three is how the Jew is supposed to behave within their home, meaning within their environment of holiness. And book four is the calling and the story of how we bring the Torah, not to within our home, that's book three, but to the rest of the world. And that's book four. So in a way, book four is going to be, of all the books, the most messy, the most painful, the most disappointing. But in a way, book four is the ultimate goal of the Torah and the purpose of the Torah, which will then allow us to come into the land of Israel, which is reaching the new stage of transforming the world to make it a holy space. But that is, again, not in the Torah, that's in the book of Joshua, but that's for the future. But in the core of the Torah, book three and book four is holiness within your home, holiness outside, and then holiness outside in the wilderness. And in a way, so that's closing this point and opening up a new point under the same umbrella. If you look at the two names of the book, you have Bamidbar, wilderness, and then you have the book of Numbers, and like I said in Hebrew, Chumash HaPekudim, the book of the census. And here too, these are opposite names. They're not two separate names. They're opposing names because wilderness is the opposite of order. And Numbers, the whole idea of Numbers is to insert order in a chaotic space. Right? Before something is counted, it's random, but if it's counted and if it's set up, and if you know how they're traveling in the desert and each person has their space within the broader camp, that's providing order. So the order and the wilderness are opposing names. The goal is precisely that, to bring order to the wilderness. So that's a little bit about the book in general, even before we get into the specifics of the Parsha and the census. But I felt like it's good to speak about the book in general and where we're headed, and so maybe be proactive in the sense of preempting the sadness that's going to happen in a few weeks by saying that, yes, there may be some disappointment in the book, but on the other hand, the purpose of the Torah is to play out specifically in the challenges of the wilderness, spiritual wilderness, that is. Go ahead, Vicky, please.
Oh, thank you, Rabbi. That's a beautiful idea. How we can use order in order to survive in the wilderness. I was also thinking from the beginning of the class today is what Gevura of Malchus, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So that's kind of. Can you please connect that to, because that's a kind of discipline and the main lesson of for us. From that idea that the only way for us to survive, to bring peace into the world and to use some structure.
Right. So Numbers, breaking things down into details, is the function of Gevura, right? So Gevura would be chesed, kindness is love. Love is not discriminating, right? If I love somebody, I love you completely. Gvura is being more judgmental, and Gvura is more breaking things down. The relationship between Bina and Gvura, both Bina and Gvura are in the left column. It's the analyzing. So in the mind, it's Bina, the analyzing, and analyzing is breaking things into details. And also gvura, strength, discipline is you are discriminating. You are treating different people differently based on what they need and based on what they deserve, right? So there is details. Gvura is all about details. Bina and gvura is about details. And in a way, in the positive sense, every detail is critical, right? You could look at yourself and say, I'm part of a larger nation. And in a way, that's inspiring because I'm part of something greater than self. But on the other hand, it's also, I don't want to say dehumanizing, but it robs me of my personal personality and perspective and talents, because I'm not a person for myself. I'm just part of a whole, right? But when you talk about counting could be both ways, but certainly the way we're counted here, what we're saying, it's the opposite point. It's what we're saying is you as an individual are critical for this enterprise. And yes, there may be another 600,000 people, but just like in a battle, if this soldier is holding a front and one soldier opens up and breaches, that can undermine the entire people, right? The entire effort. So the census represents that every individual is critical, and critical not only as part of a whole, because of their unique talents and their unique personality and unique gifts and unique mission. So in that sense, it's very much related to gvura.
Thank you so much. That was very like appropriate, very useful information, because the malchus is also understanding your
so malchut is also about speech. And it's interesting that the word midbar, the word for, right, because malchut is projection, right? So malchut is speech. It's one expression of malchut. And even the idea of kingship happens through speech, right? To rule over other people. Malchut kingship is also to influence people. And influence people is primarily through speech. And the whole idea that you're interacting with the outside world is malchut. The other 6 sefirot are within yourself. And malchut is how you interact with people outside of you. In other words, even chesed is I feel love. Gvura is I feel the discipline. But malchut is projecting that outward to the real world, either through speech or through action. It's very much related to the wilderness, because the wilderness, first of all, it's an interesting concept that in the Hebrew, midbar and medaber are the same word. Wilderness and speech is the same word, right? Because in a way, speech is expressing yourself outside in the wilderness. In other words, outside the order of self. So it's very much connected to today's sefira.
Thank you so much. Very insightful. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to mention one more thing before we even go further about this idea of every individual, the importance, how the census highlights the importance of every individual. I think I'm sharing the screen. Yeah. So the first thing is like this: why do you have to count, and what's the purpose of counting? And we'll read the Rashi. It's a famous Rashi. So I'll read the verse and then the Rashi and then the next Rashi and then the next verse. The Lord spoke to, so this is the opening of the book and the Parsha, Numbers 1, chapter 1, verse 1. The Lord spoke to Moses in the Sinai desert in the tent of meeting on the first day of the 2nd month, in the 2nd year after the exodus from the lands of Egypt. So this is interesting. It's a date telling you when it happened. And so why do I need a date? So it happened a month earlier, a month later. We can get into that. There's something to add over here. Again, every detail, we can talk about every detail for half an hour. So I'm trying to do gvura and be a little bit more disciplined, but I think we can tie that in. Again, everything I can tie into one idea, I'm going to try my best. So let's read Rashi. He says in the 1st month. Now we know, I guess what Rashi is pointing out, Rashi is pointing out there were 3 censuses within a year, which is strange. You're looking at this date. The date is the 1st of the 2nd month of the 2nd year when they left the Exodus. So within 13 months, even less, within 13 months or 12 and a half months, there were 3 censuses. Now in the United States, we have a census once every 10 years, right? Here you have 3 in 1 year. So why are they having this date? This is perhaps why Rashi is addressing, even before the Torah says, take the census, count, which is then verse 2. Verse 1, he's talking about the census because I think he's commenting on the date. Like, why are we taking a census so soon after the previous one? So let's read Rashi. The Lord spoke in the Sinai desert on the 1st of the month. Because they were dear to him, meaning because the Jewish people are dear to God, he counts them often. Not a perfect translation. Kal sha'as, always. Because God loves the Jewish people, he counts them continuously. When they left Egypt, he counted them. When many fell because of the sin of the golden calf, there was the 3,000 Jews were killed. He counted them to know the number of the survivors. When he came to cause his divine presence to rest among them, he counted them. On the first of Nisan, the Mishkan was erected, and the first of Iyar, he counted them. In other words, we're pointing out why the first of Iyar. It's after first of the second month, the first of the second month of Iyar. So we know the Mishkan, the eighth day that the temple was built. The first of Nisan. Nisan is almost 12 months after they left Egypt. They left Egypt on the 15th of Nisan, the 15th of the first month. And then 1 year later, almost a full year later, the first of Nisan, they built the temple. In other words, they concluded, and that was the day of the inauguration. And then a month later, they did the census. Why exactly a month later? We'll talk about it. But what we see from Rashi is that the census represents love. Okay, fine. Let's read one more verse. Take the sum of all the congregation of the children of Israel by families following their fathers' houses, a head count of every male according to the number of their names. Later we see it's not just specifically males, it's specifically the ones who are eligible for war, for battle, and that's 20 to 60. And again, part of this is because they're about to enter the land of Israel, right? They didn't know that. I mean, at that point, it wasn't supposed to be a 40-year detour. It was supposed to go straight into Israel. So we understand you want the Kol Yotzei Tzava, like the Torah is going to say, anyone who goes out to the military. Okay, what am I saying here? I'm saying here a few things. The Hebrew word for counting is a strange word. There are all kinds of ways of saying it, but this is another word. This is the word that's used here. It's also used elsewhere in the Torah in the book of Exodus. It's not the most common word that you would think for numbers. So take the sum of all the congregation of the children of Israel. Literally in Hebrew, Se'u et Rosh, lift up the head of Kol Hadat, of the entire congregation of the children of Israel. Counting is lifting up the head. Why is counting lifting up the head? Why would you say lift up the head? There are other ways of saying counting in Hebrew, in the Torah. There is even mispar, the number. There is, and that's a modern Hebrew word as well. Then there's pakod, which is less common in modern Hebrew, but it does exist in modern Hebrew, and it appears many times in the 5 books of Moses, including and the rest of the Bible as well. So here we have not a word that's counting, but almost like a euphemism, a description. Se'u et rosh, lift up the head. What am I supposed to do with that? What does that even mean? So we know lifting up the head means counting, but why do you use the term lift up the head? So there's a great Kabbalist, the Shalom, 16th century, or the 17th century. And he wrote a book. This book was called Shnei Luchot HaBrit, the two tablets of the covenant. And he's a great sage, great Kabbalist. A lot of the ideas of Hasidism come from the Shalom. And he says like this. I think I wrote him down here. Yeah. He says that Se'u et Rosh, going back to counting, right? Counting could have two connotations. Counting can have, I'm just a number. I don't really mean. I'm just part of a bigger picture. But he's saying no. He's saying counting means that every individual matters. So it raises the head. It lifts up the person. It shows you that you are significant. That the temple cannot be built. We can't enter Israel without you as an individual. So the Torah emphasizing that there's different ways of counting, right? Sometimes counting is actually, we don't really care about you, you're just a number. Unfortunately, that counting exists. But that's not the counting we're referring to here. The counting we're referring to here is that Moses and Aaron counted into each individual. And Nachmanides is a beautiful description how the point is that every single person comes before Moses and Aaron, and they could even look at them, and they could look at each other, and the leader is looking at me and telling me that I matter and I have value. And that's the Se'u et Rosh. That's lift up the head. And the Shalom continues and says that you cannot, the Shvat HaShechina, the divine presence cannot dwell in the Jewish people until you lift up the head, until every individual knows that they are critical for the service of Hashem. because you could say, I'm only one of a few million Jews or a few billion people. So my choice, my decision doesn't matter. So we say, no, counting is lifting up the head, saying your role is critical and related to what Maimonides says, quoting the Talmud, which is one of the most often quoted things that the Rebbe would say, was that every person has to see the world as in balance, perfect balance, and your one deed could tilt the balance to the good. Right? So you say, what am I? I'm just one person. Yeah. But this deed that you're doing, you could actually influence the entire world. That happens by lifting up the head, by showing that every individual is critical to the mission of the Jewish people. And again, that goes into the details that we're talking about. The counting is the empowering every individual person. One more point related also to this, to the interplay between the individual and the community. Part of what's happening here, and part of why this census was different than the other censuses that we have earlier when they left Egypt, is that this census, it wasn't just to count the total of how many Jewish people there were, but like you saw, gotta wait for this truck to pass. But like you saw in the Parsha in a nutshell, you saw that the census was to highlight how many people, what tribe you're from, because we want to know the amount of tribes, because we're going to divide the camp into three, the Jewish people, the camp into 4 different camps, and each camp has 3 tribes. So we're basically, it's also counting, but it's also figuring out how many people are in each tribe. And if you look at the verse is going to say it's more than it's not just the tribes, but it's also the families, right? You have that here. Suat Rosh, take the sum of the congregation of the children of Israel by families, following their fathers' houses, a head count of every male according to the number of their names. So again, the mishpachotam, to their families, to the fathers' houses. Rashi says that when you say families, you're not sure if it's the mother's family or father's family, assuming the mother and father are from 2 different tribes, right? Says Rashi, if one's father was from one tribe and his mother is from another tribe, he is counted with his father's tribe. That comes from the Talmud Bamidbar. So it's interesting that the determining the Judaism comes from the mother, but determining the tribe comes from the father. That's another discussion. But in any case, this census is different because we're counting not just the individual, but also the tribe. Now think about these 2 points. The counting, I'm sorry, not just counting the one total of all the Jewish people, but counting each person as the total of each tribe and the subtotal of each tribe, and then the grand total of everybody together. So if you think about it, this is highlighting 2 points. On one hand, the number and the counting means it's equalizing. We're all the same. We're all part of one people. On the other hand, when you maintain the tribal distinction, and you're going to do that in the numbers, you're also going to do that by placing the people in different camps, different tribes within different camps. So that highlights the differences between people. And that's a balance. On one hand, we say every person is equal, every person has a soul, every person is part of God, and that makes us, that equalizes us in a way that says we're the same. On the other hand, every person has their individual talents and their individual responsibility and individual path in life, and that creates division. Now, could you have a nation that highlights this division? Right? Look about Israel today. You talk about we're in a war, maybe multiple fronts. And some people would say, and I tend to agree, that one of the most dangerous things is sort of the inner division. Thank God there's a lot of division people came together, but now it seems like it may be fraying a little bit. So highlighting the differences, and again, people say, why are they so different? Why can't we get along? How come if you have 2 Jews, they have 3 opinions? In a way, it's a positive, in a way that each person is so committed to what they value that they can't respect the other perspective, right? So there's always a danger that focusing too much on my individual path is going to put me in conflict with the other paths. So that's the danger. So there's a commentary, I forget who says this, I think it's the Kliyaka, I don't forget who says this. It's just like this. That's why, if you look at the census and when the census took place, the Torah tells you that the census happens on the beginning, the first day of the second month, right? So on the first day of the second month in the second year after the exodus from the land of Egypt. And we read Rashi already, so we know that the reason why there's a census every time there's a big event. What was the big new event right now? The big event was the building of the tabernacle, right? So they took them out of Egypt, he counted them. When they fell after the golden calf, he counted them. And when God came to dwell his divine presence amongst them with the Shekhinah, with the creating the temple, then he counts them again. But if you think about it, that happened 30 days earlier. That was the first of the first month. So why wait a full month before you start the census? If you want to say that it's associated, the census is associated, the third census is associated with the building of the Mishkan, so why do it a month later? Do it in the same month that you built the Mishkan. So here's what the rabbis comment. This is a beautiful commentary. This is a dangerous census because this census, unlike the previous census, which just counted every individual as part of the Jewish people, highlights what we have in common. In a way, this census highlights what differentiates us from other people, from other tribes. In other words, it focuses more on the individual personality and mission of every individual tribe. That divides us. Therefore, we can't emphasize that aspect before we have a foundation that unites us. What is that foundation? That is the temple in the center. So we have a temple in the center. Once we're used to the temple, once we have 30 days of internalizing the idea that we're all serving the same God, now we could diverge into different camps and we understand that we're all around the temple. So the temple represents the unifier. Once you have a basis of unity, we all have a soul, we all have a mission, we're all part of the same mission. And then you could realize within that overarching mission, every person has their own individual mission. And therefore, I may be on one side I may be to the east, you may be to the west. We're all part of the same mission. And what unites us, what keeps us grounded is the temple in the middle. And that's the beautiful image of the temple in the middle as opposed to a straight line. There's a debate in the Talmud. When they travel in straight line or they travel in formation with the four camps. But without getting into that right now, it's clear that when they camped, they're camping in a formation where the temple is in the middle. What that does is that erases the hierarchy. It's not like the tribe of Judah or the leaders are any closer to the temple than the tribe of Dan, which is supposed to be the last one in the back after everybody, right? Because you may be to the east, they may be to the west, but because we have the temple in the center, like a circle, all points of the circle are the same close to the center, right? So in that, what happens in that context is that you may have your path, and the other person has their other path. You may be on the east, they may be on the west. You seem to be in very different directions, but you understand that you have the same mission, overarching mission, which is the temple, which is bringing the word of God into the world. And once you have that unifier, then you can highlight the separation. And that's why the first month, we talk about the temple. The second month, we can start talking about the differences between us. And again, that's the balance of being part of one people, but having my own individual path. And that's why Moshe counts me, but counts me means lifts up my head. Lifting up my head represents that I, as an individual, am critical for the application of the divine will of bringing the Mishkan into the world. So that's the story in short. A lot more to say about the Parsha, about the book. But I think that's it for today. Any comments, questions are welcome. Apologies for the few-minute delay. Hope to see you in good health in the future. Of course, next Thursday is still Shavuot, so we don't have the Parsha. But we will resume the following week. And in the following week, that's where the drama lifts up again because we get the episodes. We're back to the episodes of the Torah. I had a friend in Greenwich who would say, he would stop coming to shul at the end of the book of Exodus, and he would say, call me back in the spring when we start getting the stories. So the stories are coming back in 2 weeks from now. Next time we meet on a Thursday, God willing, in good health. Thank you very much. Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you very much, Rabbi. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.